Доброго дня, вітаю усіх.
I'm Andrea Lochin, and I'm a little worried because our guest today is...
Наша гостя.
Well, this is a real classic of modern-day children's literature,
Дитячої
the famous Olesya Mamchich. Her books are studied in school. Schoolchildren study them.
Ось, хто з'їв.
Well, who ate my pajamas? Here, electric car Sanka. A pineapple fell on us. These are all well-known books, and not only among children but also among their parents and grandparents. Well, there's no need to worry when you talk with such an amazing woman. You will understand me in a minute.
Не можна не хвилюватися. Зараз ви мене зрозумієте.
Olesya, well, when our guests are writers, real writers, I would say famous writers, not just authors of one or two books.
Однієї-двох книжок. Я
I'm always interested as to how they actually came to this kind of life. How did they become writers? Well, I know that you personally began to be published, printed, almost from the age of 14.
з 14 років.
In early childhood, you wrote. Did you see yourself as a writer in your childhood? Girls dream of becoming actresses, dancers. In your childhood days, did you see yourself as a writer or not? I started being published around the age of 10 to 11 and started writing even earlier, before I knew all the letters of the alphabet. I had 3 dreams, one of which came true. One dream was to become an astronaut, the second one an Olympic champion in rhythmic gymnastics, and the third a writer. Well, 1 out of 3 came true. Well, I don't know if you can say that, but as a man I'll tell you, you have absolutely cosmic phrases. The phrase that no one doubts that dragons really do exist, from a children's book. This is something cosmic. Well, you've also retained the figure of an artistic gymnast. Well, let's say dreams come true. And please tell me, how did you actually start publishing and so on? Because it is not easy to become a writer. I think you did not come and say, so I wrote a children's story. And everybody said, yes, we'll publish you now. What was the path you took?
Який був цей шлях?
Well, first of all, I was terribly lucky with the teachers. I met very good writers who supported me. It all started with the fact that my dad brought me poems to a magazine. There was this magazine called Sunflower. I remember it. And Olesya Mamchich immediately noticed them and printed my first verses. And I'm very grateful to her for this. She remembers all this very well, the first time I was published. And we're still very good friends.
Слухайте.
Listen, how was it? You were still a young girl and you got published. What about your parents? They were terribly proud that their daughter, almost a writer, is growing up. Not everyone had computers then, but my dad had one, and he typed in my text and printed such self-made books. And I painted them, while my parents helped me.
Слухайте.
Oh well, but the question still remains.
Ось яке.
You grew up, you became a writer, but you have remained a children's writer. As far as I understand, children's literature is precisely what you are doing.
Це те, чим ви займаєтесь. Чому?
Why not for adults? First of all, I have 2 wings of creativity. I write adult literature and I write children's literature. These are 2 completely different processes. It seems to me that 2 different parts of the brain are responsible for them. Because when I write adult poetry or prose, this is a completely different energy process, a completely different state. And aren't these processes similar? And when I write children's literature, I usually laugh quite often. And when this happens on a bus, people might think that a crazy girl is sitting and laughing to herself. Sometimes it is so funny to me that I can't laugh out loud for half an hour just at the fact that I wrote something funny for children. I do not know how to combine it all. So are there 2 different Olesyas? One of them is adult, soulful somehow, and the other one is a child, a laughing girl. Well, something like that. Well, this is very interesting, so please tell me. Let's start with children's ideas, because when I thought about you coming today, it struck me that your works are officially included in the school curriculum. Who is a classic of Ukrainian literature for me? This is an author whose portraits hang.
Знаєте, для мене завжди класик української літератури – це хто? Ну, це той автор, чиї портрети висять.
Well, maybe with a beard or some fleas. And he died a long time ago.
Ну,
Well, not that he died a long time ago, but his face should hang in the literature room. And school children should sit and think how to build their lives according to the precepts of the great classics.
Своє життя за заповітами великих класиків.
And you too are among the writers that children read. They must read it at school.
Зобов'язані читати у школі.
Tell me honestly, do you feel good in the sense of a portrait and a classic with the fleas? I'm very grateful to those people who pushed school reform. They introduced a whole line of modern authors, because I myself am engaged in alternative school education, and I understand that the world needs to be rebuilt on its head. And modern writers who come through anthologies or through meetings. And I often come directly to the disciples. They simply build a completely different perception of literature, like something that can be interesting or something that can answer certain questions. When I come to school children, I often come across questions of survival. It's funny, but they're kids. We laugh, we have fun, and they still have the thought in their minds that books can be read. For me, updating these syllabuses is such a definite mission for attracting children to reading.
Отже, шкільна програма. Шкільна програма.
So, the school syllabus. As for me, the school syllabus has always been a complete disaster. Why? Because adults with experience wrote books at the age of 30 to 40 to 50 for adults. And now, poor school children aged 10, 12, or 14 are studying all this. They're trying to understand what they're talking about. And you know there is no better way to hate modern classical literature than to teach it in school. We need to do something about this.
Сучасну класичну літературу, ніж вивчати її в школі. З цим треба щось робити. Що?
Maybe our today's guest knows what to do. A classic of children's school literature.
Дитячої шкільної літератури.
To understand this somehow, I had to delve deeply into practice. And 8 years ago, my friends and I created our own school, where we began to teach as we thought it necessary. For 8 years now, I have been offering children a course in which I mix new literature, critical thinking, and all these attempts to show all this from some other angle. They are aimed at having the child imagine himself or herself. For example, when we have 8th grade this year, we learned of Shevchenko's time in the dungeons. So I'd just read his recollections, knew it well, put each child on a chair facing the wall and told them that we're now in a dungeon. There's no phone with you, be silent and think. And they just stood for 5 minutes, then they began to freak out big time. And then I gave them texts from these casemates. I visually tried to do everything, just like he had there in the manuscripts, and said, well, now read the text that he wrote in those conditions and write your emotions in the margins. They perceived it quite differently. They said, I now understand how difficult it is to be yourself in such conditions. I pumped up the atmosphere a little. Just imagine your destinies changing. As for me, that's right. As for me, this is a very big problem of our school syllabus. Our literature is so detached from our actual lives. These sufferings of some maids there or so, earth or something else, everything is so far away from us. The closest thing for us was the Kaidash's family. It could be read and reread because for us it was a serious, very funny, joyful and truthful about all happens. But how do you bring literature to children? How should this be done? To be honest, I had a lot of questions about the school syllabus. I began to understand the school syllabus only after I got to 35, because the authors wrote this in the Middle Ages. You can bring it up in the form of a game, maybe with the music, modern songs, with classics, you can search. The singer-songwriter is Scriabin, who sang along with Shevchenko. But I tried to mix it all up with modern literature, mostly teen stuff. And if they're very small, then with literature for kids, because I think it is better to learn to read reading Harry Potter, and then to grow up to read Shakespeare at the age of 40, than to try to read Shakespeare at 12 and never open another book in your life. You are absolutely right. And another question, here you have books for very young children. For very small ones. I do not understand, and I will never understand. How do you write for them? At the time when you are writing, do you become a child or a teacher or educator?
Дитиною, чи навпаки вчителем, чи вихователькою.
Or do you see a child from the side? Or vice versa, from the inside? The texts are very different from what is written for adults and even for teenagers.
Для дорослих і навіть для підлітків.
In fact, I'm very interested in this kindergarten junior school format because they are very funny children and I have a lot of direct communication with them. And I just pull out these ideas. A child talked about the cabbage ghost and I imagined it and wrote about the cabbage ghost. Another one spoke about the heaviest school bag in the world. For me, this is not just a continuation of the game. However, yes, this literature has certain features. These texts cannot be long. Words need to be selected there so that the child understands. You cannot use long sayings. Although this is such a fantasy game, children at this age, their imagination is not fixed. And just by fantasizing in this area, you can create stuff endlessly. Anything you like. So electric car Sasha is possible. Surely.
Ну і нарешті не
Well, finally, I have to ask about the work of the adult and mature poetess Olesya Mamchich, who writes poetry for adults and prose for teenagers.
поезію для дорослих і прозу для підлітків. Ну і власне хочеться.
Well, actually, I want to know more about this young and charming woman. Because you know, for us, a poet, a prose writer is just a certain portrait on the wall. But in fact, they're all alive, interesting and terribly talented. Creativity for adults is mostly poetry. Although I'm approaching prose for adults, I'm now writing prose for teens and gradually, carefully approaching prose for adults. Poetry for adults and poetic translations, this is exactly what I'm very interested in doing. And to write adult poetry is somehow completely different. And sometimes I even fear it because it seems to possess something mystical. It sometimes happens to me that I will write something and it will really come true after 3 months. This happens that when I read texts written a month before Maidan or something else. In fact, this happens not only with me. Well, maybe. So I catch what's in the air. Write something good, I beg you. You see, when someone wants to write what he or she wants, this is very good. Usually good is certain automatism. And when you can write smarter than you actually are in life. Sometimes you sit and think that in life I would not say this so cleverly. And then you come up with such a phrase that I understand. I have always been a supporter of the ancient Greek theory that poets and writers are ruled by certain higher powers that we're only the mouthpieces with which they say something to people, sometimes with our pen. And we ourselves do not understand what actually happened and how we wrote it. But tell me please, I have always been interested in knowing this, how are verses composed? For me, it has always been mysticism and mystery. I have always treated people who know how to compose verses a little. You know, I always wanted to touch them, to see if they're real. I never understood how this is done. I have a feeling that I have a certain writing organ mounted inside of me. And if you do not use it, you feel very bad. It's like you have a leg but you do not walk. It will atrophy. There are periods when I do not write for a long time. I get so angry. Well, that is, it's impossible for you not to write, not because you feel bad. And when I write, for me it is a sharp intake of breath. And how are they born? It is very, very different. It happens from some simple phrase, and sometimes it is just a stream. Then you sit down and it is just written by itself. And there are some things that I carry for 6 months. Just a melody appears and it torments you until it turns into a word. You know, I want a frame for you to the writer and poetess. And Olesya Mamchich, what is she like in life, as a human being? So let's abstract you from the fact that you are a well-known author. You can say a living classic. Here you're simply, a beautiful woman is set in front of me now. How would you write your self-portrait, literary self-portrait? How would you describe yourself as the heroine of a novel about Olesya Mamchich? What would you write about yourself? The personal stuff about an author is always interesting. What were these classics that now hang on our wall? What are you really like? Just be honest. Well, sometimes when I walk with my children, someone who sees bad can confuse us and say that I'm also a child. It sometimes touches me a lot. That's beautiful. Naturally, I'm a very emotional person. Many people who practice the word are professionally deformed. It comes from books, that's all understood. Very intuitive. Well, there have been a lot of interesting things in my life. For example, the organization of an alternative school, traveling half the world on a Tesla. Or I can chop firewood. Even I do not know how to do that. I'm being honest. I can do a lot of amazing things. Is it true that a writer, in order to write a really adult book, must accumulate certain experience, which he or she then expresses in his works? A writer cannot be someone who sits at home and absolutely does not know either life, or any countries, or any actions. For example, like chopping firewood. He cannot write about it because he has no experience, no skills. And just as the Italians cannot say a word with their hands tied behind their backs, the writer cannot write a single line without knowing exactly what he's writing about. I think that the experience which you are talking about is especially about prose writers, because someone who writes great prose cannot but know the peculiarities of being. Here I am trying to find that difference between poets and writers of prose. What is the difference? Over time, inner experience. By the way, internal experience can be lived without moving. The issue is just the things you live through, what you comprehend, and how you perceive all of this. That is, certain actions, perhaps on the surface and not so radical ones, can be digested so globally in you, will become such experience from which a lot of things will grow. Listen, how about a small spoiler? What can we expect from Olesya Mamchich in the literary sense in the near future? What are you working on? I already have a book for teenagers at the publishing house, and it is about to be released. Well, let's say 10+ teen prose. It's called Ivana and the Bathtub. There are a lot of funny stories in it. For example, about a pregnant ghost that lives in a supermarket, and it eats violet felt-tip pants because all pregnant women want to eat something amazing. And pregnant ghosts too? Definitely. Will pregnant ghosts give birth, or will something else happen? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We won't, because it is a spoiler. Then I still have to release a book of children's poetry, which is called How to Roar Properly, with such detailed instruction. Well, I think I've written a book of adult poetry too, and I still have a lot of ideas. What I told you is what is really in the works and is about to be released. I hope that I will present all this at the Book Arsenal Festival in Kiev. Well, I hope that we will meet there again, talk and see all these books, and we'll definitely read them. Thank you so much for coming.